for explanations of vote, and I would ask colleagues to leave the room swiftly and quietly. Ladies and gentlemen, we can move on to explanations of vote now. If you wish to continue your discussions, please note that we are beginning explanations of votes. Marielle de Sarnez's report. Mr. Caputo has the floor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Today I voted against the additional importation quota tariff-free imports of 70,000 tonnes of Tunisian olive oil. This is the wrong choice, which won't help Tunisia, and it will increase the risk of fraud, damage European consumers, and particularly Italian producers, including those in Puglia who are already experiencing difficulties. In 2015, Tunisian imports of olive oil to Italy increased by over 80%. There are already 56,700 tonnes of duty-free olive oil allowed under the current agreement. The clear risk is that we're going to see an increase in fraud, and we're going to mislead consumers about the origin of their products, and it will also lead to unfair competition. I don't oppose the European Union helping Tunisia, but the way in which they're doing it. We should be working towards greater democracy in Tunisia, but just buying their products won't help. Thank you.
Yes. Monsieur Golnisch.
Je serai très bref, Monsieur le Président.
Just briefly, I just get the impression that seeing as we're not getting translation in French, that there's a problem. I couldn't follow in French in any case what was going on.
I'm sorry. We'll try and resolve that issue. Mr. Hannan. Mr. Hannan is not in the chamber. Mr. Jahr.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President. On the one hand, there's a great deal of joy about the report having been adopted, because the best form of development aid is mutual trade, and free trade arrangements generate economic development, and economic development generates jobs, jobs generates income and prosperity. So far, so good. On the other hand, however, we know that when it comes to important agricultural products, there's collateral damage in the single market if we're not careful. And when it comes to vegetable and fruit sectors in the European Union, we have a latent overproduction. and that can, of course, lead to a reduction in prices for our farmers. That's why I call on the Commission, first of all, to be fully aware of the problem, and secondly, to make sure that there are compensatory measures for our farmers in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Takkula, you have the floor.
Arvoisa
President, thank you. What I would like to say about this cooperation with Tunisia, it is very important that we support Tunisia and support them especially in their way to democracy. We need it very much in the northern part of Africa and all of that continent. However, I think that we should also see to it that our olive oil production in the southern part of Europe will be maintained, and we would take care of the quality and production amounts there. So now that this tariff-free quota has been raised, it is not such a good thing. The existing quota would have been enough. So I agree with Mr. Caputo with what he said about the agreement.
Thank you. We now move on to Mrs. Grostet's report. Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, President. This proposal marks an attempt of the European Union to further develop legislation on animal health. Very often medicines are developed not only to treat animals but also to treat human beings. This proposal for resolution tries to improve access to existing medicines, as well to support innovation and development of new medicines, as well as to fight against antibacterial resistance. This latter issue was discussed during the plenary session this week, and I voted in favor.
Mr. Hannan isn't here. Mr. Yar.
Mr. Yar.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Agriculture is assuming its responsibility. The use of veterinary medicinal products, when we're using them, there are two things we have to make sure we cover. One, it has to be an appropriate commensurate use, and secondly, we have to look at the possible side effects, bearing in mind the idea of reserve antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. Of course, agriculture is only part of the issue, but if it is only part of the issue, nevertheless it needs to be resolved. And in this report, I think we're on the right path to find some useful compromises. We want to ban the purchase and sales of antibiotics on the internet. We want to reduce the deployment of antibiotics, and we have a dual approval approach for the antibiotics that we've introduced, which I think is very important for these very important medicines, and will reduce the amount they're used.
Thank you. We can now move on to Mr. Tănăsescu's report, and I'll give Mr. Pospíšil the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is related to the previous points. It is about veterinary medicinal products. I welcome that this has already been governed in directives. We are now trying to regulate it better. I think this is good. We should not continue expanding the powers of the EU and regulate more and more areas, but rather regulate better those that have already been regulated. This is the main idea behind this regulation, which is why I have voted in favor. It is in favor of animals, and I am particularly pleased that I can see that it has great support in Parliament.
Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I welcome the new proposals for financing the European Medicines Agency. I also agree that the role of the agency in registration of veterinary medicine should be improved, and it is a step forward. Now every member state has its own system. We need a common denominator. I also welcome changes which reduce Commission's competence, so we will be in co-decision procedure, not under implementing acts as before, and it is also good that there will be overviews every 5 years, and I voted in.
Thank you. Mr. Hannell is not with us. Mr. Jahr.
Thank you very much, President. Well, just to add to the previous report, I just wanted to include the points that fundamentally you can but agree with this report. But I'd just like to point out, and again, I'm very pleased that agriculture is a very transparent sector. We have a high demonstration level of antibiotics, and we have a new approval procedure. But I just have one request. These specificities that we see in the agricultural area, the veterinary area, that these specificities also be transposed to the human medicinal sector as well, when it comes to increasing information, the density of use, the way that these are used. I think there's a lack of clarity there. There's a lack of data. It seems you can only get statistics gathered through the health insurance companies. But I think agriculture here can prove a model for human medicine. So the use of antibiotics is a big problem. It affects all areas of society. So all areas need to contribute to the solution, both the veterinary side and the human medicinal side.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, President. I was happy to support this report, and I was glad to see it was accepted.
In the profession for many years, I have great admiration for them. I think they're a sector of society that do not get enough praise for their good work, and particularly here in Europe, where we have a very good name, as Mr. Jahr pointed out, of traceability of our food products from farm to fork. It's the veterinary profession that are the guardians of that particular great image which we have and we want to preserve. And for that reason, the proposals here before us today are very apt. We want to ensure that there is full compliance with the rules. And again, as Mr. Jahr pointed out, the one danger is that a sale maybe over the internet might not be always what we would like it to be. And that needs to be looked at very, very carefully to preserve the good name of the products, but also of the profession, which, as I said, is exemplary. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. We'll move on to the resolutions towards a data-driven economy. Mrs. Stiller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I fully support the resolution towards a data-centred economy, and in particular references to digital skills. If we are to enable our citizens to truly grasp the possibilities of the digital world, we need coordinated action across member states. The need to provide digital education and training opportunities, whether it's school, college, university, at the workplace or in pensioners' clubs, have never been so important, because if we don't have digital skills, we can't access the potential of the digital single market to create jobs and support the European economy. We need digital skills to be at the heart of all that we do. As the Swedish Prime Minister offered to host a special summit on social Europe yesterday, I'd like to see also a digital skills summit organised and prioritised so that no EU citizen is left behind in this digital revolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I also thank you. Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Till the year 2020, the data amount will be 16 trillion. So it means increase yearly 60% at least. So in case of 40 zettabytes, it means that over 5,200 gigabytes for every inhabitant of this planet. So the potential is huge. We have to use it. I support this document. And in the interest of consumers, education professionals, health professionals and so on, we need clear information for people. The European Union, the Commission have to do it, and this also concerns innovations and investments, not only on the EU level, but in all other levels too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you again, President. It was interesting that in this report there was one exception in the voting list, when you yourself didn't know whether people were for or against the amendment, which was number 26. And I think that's not right in a way. I think that we need evidence at the end of the day of how people cast their vote. And we need this on every report. We need to know how many people voted, how many were in favour, how many were against, on every report. And I think we should look at that in all reports in future. Outside of that, this is a very, very important report. And as a rapporteur, I think now we, and I include myself here, hope to progress this report further. Thank you very much.
I would tell you that the groups are asking, for a nominal vote or not. So I am just implementing what I get here from the others. So.
Sorry, I'm making no criticism of you, whatever you have to follow the rules. But I think it is something we should look at. We should look at from the point of view of record for those who want to see how we voted.
There are amendments which are worthy of being checked like this. This is the point. Thank you very much.
We now move on to the other motions for resolutions. Eritrea, Mr. Pospíšil.
Thank you, President. I supported this resolution dealing with the situation in Eritrea. The situation is extremely tragic. It's one of the poorest countries in the world with a totalitarian regime that considers its own citizens to be basically able to go for the national service, which is indefinite. It is torturing its citizens. This is one of the countries with the highest number of refugees right after Syria that comes to Europe. And the country is not suffering from local civil war. This is basically due to the regime, to the cruel conditions in that country. That is very important that we call upon the local regime to rectify the situation. Whether or not this is going to have any impact on the totalitarian junta, I don't know, but this is very important to at least point it out, even though I have a feeling that it will have no impact on local government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Chair. Eritrea today is in a very bad situation as far as human rights are concerned, freedom of speech, resources. Actually, there is no independent judiciary. All Eritrean people aged from 18 to 50 have to go to the army in very bad conditions. And of course many of them become refugees to the EU. So those who call Eritrea an African country are partly right. So it is a statement by itself. But unfortunately the EU has no leverage to influence the situation in Eritrea. It cannot make an impact to Asmara behavior. The present government doesn't care what we say here, and at the same time they have very bad relationship with their neighbors, but we hope that this resolution will help. Thank you.
Thank you once again, President.
Fully supportive of this motion of resolution submitted by my own group, the European People's Party. And in relation to the current situation in Eritrea, the calls on the Eritrean authorities to release all political prisoners, reform and shorten national service obligations, stop all forced evictions and demolitions, and expand the provision of social housing. I would like to stress the need for Eritrea to respect and implement the right to education without coercion, the inobservance of which is causing so many young Eritreans to flee. Sustainable peace, development and prosperity cannot exist without respect for human rights. In conjunction with my party, I would like to emphasise a deep concern at the lack of freedom of expression and the continued existence of political prisoners held in violation of the principles of the rule of law. I fully support the demand stipulating the immediate release of Swedish-Eritrean journalist Dawit Isaak, who has been imprisoned under harsh conditions and without trial since September 2001 as a matter of urgency.
Thank you.
We'll move on now to the report on Macedonia. Mr. Pospíšil.
Pane předsedo, já jsem s radostí
Mr. President, I have voted in favour of this report, which describes the present situation in Macedonia and concerns the accession procedure of the country to the EU. I am convinced that we have to offer the possibility of becoming members of the EU to the countries of the Western Balkans in the long term. In case of Macedonia, I am very pleased that, by the way that Macedonia is dealing with the migration crisis and how they monitor and guard the border where Greece is unable to monitor their borders properly. So this is why we should see Macedonia as an important partner for the EU. Unfortunately, Greece is blocking the further accession because of the name of the country. I think these petty issues should not really determine whether Macedonia becomes or does not become a member of the EU.
Thank you, Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Chair. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Turkey are in difficult situation as far as accession talks are concerned. The same it is with the FYROM. The dispute with Greece, tensions with Bulgaria, these are not the sole factors that make these negotiations between the EU and Macedonia difficult. At the moment, these negotiations were not started because of the position of the Council. But one of the problems is the political instability in Macedonia, corruption, the lack of freedom and freedom of speech, another aspect, and unfortunately there is no progress to be observed. But on the whole, of course, I voted for this resolution. Let's hope that at least a step further it will get.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much, President, once again. I voted with my group on all of these votes, bar one, and that is the Amendment 7D, the one that referred to NATO. Because Ireland is a neutral country, I abstained in that vote. On that note, however, I would also like to say I agreed with most of the amendments.
Parties in Macedonia assume their respective responsibilities and to ensure without delay the full, constructive and timely implementation of all their commitments in a sustainable and negotiated manner, including their commitment to strengthen good neighbourly relations in order to maintain the positive recommendation to open EU membership negotiations. This is a very important point, and I agree with AFET's committee's demands also to engage in constructive political dialogue, particularly in preparation for the elections on the 5th of June 2016, which are going to be critical for this former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. McAvey. It's true that Macedonia faces the biggest political crisis since 2001 on. Civil society's voice is being heard increasingly in Macedonia and is actively involved in resolving the crisis. We need stability in Macedonia for society to develop. Macedonia is making efforts towards accession. We should not ignore that. the Commission has been asking the Council for a mandate to begin negotiations with Macedonia, but the Council has refused after Greek intervention. I think Greek acknowledgement should be given of Macedonia's efforts towards accession. Helping Macedonia with the refugee crisis is important, and we need to take into account the authorities' measures taken. Macedonia needs our political commitment to support them in their commitment. Otherwise, we will lose credibility if we don't acknowledge their efforts. We'll now move on to the Montenegro report. Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Despite problems in internal policy problems, Montenegro started negotiations on the accession to the EU 4 years ago, and it has been one of the most successful countries. The fact that its national currency is the euro speeds up the reform process. Last year, positive results were achieved also in the implementation of the rule of law. Maybe the improvements are not as fast as we expected, but the development is positive. Also, the education system is being reformed, and I also highly value this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
President, again, I voted along with my group in all votes on Montenegro no. That wasn't hard to do because they were all very sensible. Montenegro has made great strides of progress in many areas, and we hope to see it as a member of the European Union in the future. We have many countries who want to get into the EU, others like Britain who are trying to leave the EU. At the same time, we have to recognise that Montenegro has made huge strides of progress in civil and rights, rights for women, and that is right because we cannot put up with people being ill-treated. We have to help Macedonia to help their own people and to reduce poverty within the country and hopefully see them as a member of the EU.
Thank you, Mrs. McAvey. Montenegro has opened 22 chapters, some of which are partly closed, an important step towards the Union. We need to emphasise the visible effort made by the government in fighting terrorism and jihadism, Islamic jihadism. The crucial unresolved problem of the country is corruption. Adoption of a code of ethics for judges will not change the reality. This is a soft law and cannot be applied and won't have any teeth in countries in that region. There's no condemnation of corruption, no serious and efficient investigation of files, and there's no seizure of assets. Adopting legislation, particularly legislation which is quite lightweight and carries no penalties, is pointless. Only real concrete effects with sentences in court will help fight corruption. The same applies to organised crime and money laundering. This is an urgent unresolved problem in Montenegro. I know that they can make progress with courage and resolve, and if the political classes do not run scared. Thank you. We now move on to Mr. Gualtieri's report. Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we know, in 2012, as a reaction to the crisis, new banking sector policy was initiated in the EU, and the supervision was moved from the national level to the supranational level, and I welcome these steps. I urge to speed up structural reforms in the banking sector in order to make it more resilient to any possible future crisis. Especially it concerns the big banks. I think that depositors and clients will gain from this process because deposits will be guaranteed in principle and compensations will be foreseen irrespective of the geographical location of this.
Thank you. Mr. Takula.
Thank you, President. I voted against the report on banking union because I feel that here in Europe we have been able to manage pretty well, even too well, about our banking sector, and I could say that European taxpayers and depositors at the end of the day have been paying for reckless policies carried out by the banks, by our banks. We have many examples of these over the past crisis years, and what I am afraid in this context is that the EU through banking union is going to be a debt union, joint mutualized debt, and personally I'm against such development. I'm pro-European and I would like the European Union to develop as a union of independent states, but such constructions like the banking union that would bring more solidarity and mutualization of debt and responsibility, I'm against that, and we have to keep our banking sector on a sound basis and away from common politics in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you again, Mr. President, and indeed compliments to you for the efficient manner you chair today's proceedings, and also with a little bit of humour occasionally. And of course humour is not something we associate with banks, and certainly there was very little to be humorous or joyous about in relation to how the banks conducted themselves prior to and during the economic recession, none more so than in my own country. And I'm absolutely delighted that the European Union is taking charge of supervision of the banks, and that we have stress tests, etc., and rules applying across the European Union, because in a small country like Ireland it's too easy to be palsy-walsy, as we saw, and this can lead to many malpractices. Now we have an opportunity to create a real union for people to see our banks are working efficiently, and that the taxpayer won't be having to pick up the pieces. And I hope we'll never again have to listen to the phrase too big to fail when it comes to banks. They will all have to toe the line and do so properly in accordance with the European Union's rules, which would apply to the 28 member states.
Twice.
Thank you twice.
Thanking you twice. Domnul Annemans.
Mr. Annemans.
Ja, collega.
Ladies and gentlemen, the financial crisis that's been raging since 2007 basically around the world has led that the politicians want to get rid of risks in the economic sector by trying to increase the capital buffers and trying to deal with the financial sector in that way, which is a good idea. The European Union, however, is misusing this approach. As soon as they see a problem, they try and ignore it through their unification approach. The whole banking unit in the third pillar is to cover a deposit guarantee insurance scheme, and that's going to be a new transfer union from north to south, and as with the euro will be in a real downward spiral without any kind of end. That's why I voted against this report.
Thank you, Mrs. Grappini. Thank you, President. I voted for this report because I believe that we need a banking union, and this will play a key role in financing investments, particularly for SMEs. If we reduce banking risk, then credit risks will fall for SMEs. I think the SSM is necessary. We need quality supervision. We should not have exaggerated prudence in the banking sector and transfer all the risks to customers, especially SMEs. SME financing is vital. They need to be able to access financing so that we don't block research and adoption of new technology. I voted for the report, therefore I'm happy to see responsibility allocated to the Commission in the report, because they need to ensure fair competition in the internal market. Thank you, says the President. On that note, the meeting is adjourned until 3 p.m.
Gracias.